Woo!
Woo!
We're live.
Hello! Hello!
Hello, goslings.
Hello, goslings. I always struggle with figuring out if people can actually hear us.
Who knows?
Who knows?
Well,
Well, let's see. Olivia!
Hi, Olivia.
If you're watching, can you tell us if you can hear us?
is that a yes?
We'll wait for it. Or maybe we'll proceed.
Oh, wait,
without
there
her.
we go.
Excellent, excellent. So, hot goslings. Sorry to steal that from Aranda.
I already said it.
You already said it, okay. Hot goslings, we are so excited about this episode.
Mhm.
Clearly, we are not in our
We
office.
took a field trip. Very
Field
special
trip.
field trip.
And we
Olivia.
have
Yes, you can. Cool.
a very special guest here with us, Gina. We
Hi.
also wore our LL Bean catalog
Very
best.
matching.
A lot of earth tones. And we are here to have a conversation about sex toys and consent.
Mhm.
Because even though Valentine's Day is over and the holidays are over, one can always buy a fun, cool, sexy sex toy for a partner or yourself.
Mhm.
But how do you even start that process? And we've got a lot of questions about the conversation about sex toys. And who better to ask than Gina? So Gina, I'm gonna let you introduce yourself and
Okay.
the store that we're in right now.
So my name is Gina, and it still is a collective we, founded Nomia just 15 years ago, actually. We just celebrated 15 years.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you. I know, it's very exciting. How'd that happen? And I actually left a PhD program to do this. I was on my way to becoming a faculty member someplace. If I had succeeded, I was 2 chapters into my dissertation and said, I think I'll sell sex toys. But no, it was actually a much more serious mission was involved in that. And
Yeah.
where so I sort of joke with what my research was as I went from organizing and educating in the public to the private. So from the very inception, so this was built as sort of a resource center where we had body safe, materials and toys and ingredients, and also function as sex educators first and a store second.
Amazing. So
Awesome.
Nomia, a sexuality boutique,
Yes.
is
I
your
was born.
PhD
Yes.
dissertation
Exactly.
thesis
Exactly.
store.
Yep.
And for our viewers, I don't know, you probably can't see this because you're looking at this wall of toys, but behind us is a beautiful wall of books. And so
Yes.
this is an amazing resource center.
Yes.
And we're so excited to ask some questions.
Very
Looking
lucky.
forward to it. Yay.
Yeah. So first
Also,
question.
maybe good to keep in mind that this is a little bit different because there's going to be
A follow-up episode
Oh, yes.
on our new Hot Goss cast, which is currently getting approved by iTunes. So our first episode is going to come out
hi, Dave.
soon, and then we're going to have an interview with Gina to ask all of the fun, interesting,
be fun.
sexy questions about what it's like being somebody who owns a sex boutique.
Yeehaw.
So watch this episode and then get excited for the follow-up podcast, which will be a deeper dive.
That's going to be
Deeper
fun.
dive.
Yeah.
Oh, now we should jump in.
Now we should jump in. Now we should dive into the shallow zone. Don't do that. So my first question is the first question I ask everybody on Hot Goss, which is, why are we having this conversation?
Why are we gossing?
Why are we gossing today?
So-
What is it about sex toys, and consent that is questionable?
Well, I think there's just like a big question mark in terms of like sex toys and the place of sex toys and all of this.
Okay.
In terms of our personal lives, I think that we do a lot. We say that we're like pleasure-focused sex ed and pleasure-based sex ed, and there's this huge realm of pleasure, right, in like sex toys and in exploring that a lot of people just like feel really intimidated by. They have no idea how to jump in, and I think with that, even like how do I tell my partner that I want to use one of these toys, right? And so I think it's kind of a perfect thing for us to be talking about and figuring out how do we figure out what our boundaries are, how do we communicate that to a partner, and how do we find this whole new realm of potential pleasure for ourselves.
Yeah.
No, fantastic question. And where do we go from there? Asking the question, honestly, is the first place to start. I mean, with any communication tip, like we will frequently have folks come in for the first time, sometimes alone, sometimes with a partner, and sort of wanting to explore that, like, how do I have this conversation? So let me back up. If somebody's coming in by themselves and they want to get a toy for their partner, our first question is always going to be, have you all had that conversation? have toys been, a part of your, the world before? Well, I think with somebody else. And then the more we can flesh that out in terms of conversation, the better we can guide somebody to making a choice. And it's also not uncommon for us anyway to actually say to someone, we really hope you actually can have that conversation. Maybe come back on a date night. So that's another great way. It's a great date night idea is to find and we'll point out resource a little bit later about like some of the really cool sort of positive sex stores that are located around the country, so that wherever you are, you can find one. So that's sort of we always sort of want to hesitate. Don't buy a toy until you've had that conversation. Like that's actually important for us, and that's also how our staff are trained.
Cool. I love that. So we're having this conversation because, like many things surrounding sexuality, we need to learn how to have conversations about sex toys.
Yep.
And so my next question for you is, I feel like, at least in my upbringing and experience, sex toys especially have always carried a lot of like cultural taboos. And I'm like, where does that come from? Why do I feel like it's like such a hush-hush thing?
Cool.
Any ideas?
Yeah, I can jump. Do you want to go first?
No, go for it.
So I think that if we're looking at like sex for such a long time, it's been looked at as like it's for reproduction, right? It's supposed to be a reproductive thing. Then of course it was like looked at as being shameful to like have a sex toy, because like that's
clearly about pleasure.
You're not going to create another sex toy by fucking a sex toy.
So I think like that's probably like at the root of it, right? And then I think past that, I think there's a question of like feeling like you were like enough, right? Like feeling like you're able to provide satisfaction for your partner. Like if so, like how do I tell my partner I want this other thing in our sex life without them feeling like they're not giving me what I want in my sex life, and like. And does that have to be, because maybe they're not, but like that's not necessarily a bad thing. Doesn't mean that they're bad at sex. Doesn't mean I'm not attracted to them. I just might want or need this other thing.
Other things, right? And that's really difficult to negotiate. And I think it's really important to be able to try to raise that question. I will say, like, it's to a certain extent when it comes to relationship dynamics. Those when it's getting that deep, I always sort of I don't want to mean to sort of cop out on this, but it's like that's a bit above our pay grade, because if there's that kind of a discord in terms of like desires, and people are like, let's presume they're at the point where they're having a conversation, and those desires are not matching. At that point, we sort of like, one's hope is that isn't always the case. Like not everybody in the intimate partnership is always going to have the same desires all the time. Maybe there's a way to sort of negotiate and navigate around that. If it becomes a real issue, that's where we tend to refer out to other providers. But I think,
is that something that you would do here if like someone came in and like needed some sort of resources to make referrals?
Yeah, we have a network. Awesome. We have a network of both mental and medical providers that we refer people out to.
I didn't know that either. That's huge.
Yeah, I jokingly refer to us as the first responders on sexual matters, because frequently people will come in and say stuff to us that they would not necessarily say to their partner. And so we can sort of be there as a sounding board to sort of ask the questions, sort of targeted questions to sort of help direct them to either, if it is literature in the story that might be helpful, or if it is above our pay grade as educators, then we refer out. And that always is based on the person itself and the individual context about whether or not that's appropriate.
Cool.
So I know we got a little off track there, I'm afraid, but
but that's
so interesting. I'm like wrapped.
And I think you raise a really important point too. Is like, and we run into this a lot around the idea that like a toy is going to sort of like, I think that's where it's, I'm not providing enough with my partner, or they're not providing enough with me. Why do you have to have something that's extra? I sort of jokingly say in the world out there are toy people and there are non-toy people, and there are folks who also don't like necessarily the idea of toys because they have a very sort of deeper, more, or like, I don't know how to say them more. That's not the right language, but their relationship with their sexuality is much more focused on sort of natural sensation and touch, and that's totally cool. It's like, vive la différence. And then there are folks where the idea of having a toy seems like an intrusion. And so we sort of navigate that a lot in terms of like, is it a sound? Is it that it's something extra? Is it that? And I will say I've run into this a lot, where sometimes it's the idea of like and particularly with heterosexual couples, where a woman will know how she gets off and is having a hard time communicating that with her male partner, and that somehow, it's sort of the myth of penis vagina intercourse as being the be all and end all. So that can be sort of a place to sort of have that conversation, or try to. And I've been doing this for long enough now to sort of see a huge change with younger women, which has been really exciting. That like it's like the first vibrator sale never gets old, and to see a lot more self-confidence about that. Like, no, I'm taking my pleasure seriously, and I'm going to advocate for that. And the truth is like, that's good for everybody. That would be the whole point of it. So.
Cool. That's awesome.
So
Thank
cool.
So yeah.
There's so much in there. I would just talk to you forever. But I'm going to, I think the conversation about needs and desires and navigating that ties directly into this conversation about consent.
Yes.
And so my question about consent and sex toys is, how do you navigate consent when it comes to, how do you start that conversation? And then like, what are the sort of intricacies about consent in that conversation, in that relationship, when you bring a new object into a sexual relationship?
I think, and right there, I would say, and that would be a first place I would say, oh God, please don't do that. It's like to just go into bringing something home without it being introduced in the context of intimate connection is actually going to really raise the stakes and make it feel very uncomfortable if that conversation had not been had.
That makes sense.
And so
have the conversation first.
Have the conversation first. And both with yourself, like, and sort of like, all right, and we're sort of talking a bit about masturbation at some point later on, but I'm like, masturbation is not just a physiological process, it's also about fantasy and desire and figuring out what you want, what you like, and also what you don't like and why. So I would always sort of say, when it comes to the role of toys, don't do it in the context of being intimate or where you're really close. Do it in the context where you're out on a walk, or you're doing something where you're walking side by side, or over coffee, but something where it's not going to feel quite so charged. And it could be just really playful too. It's like, so have you ever thought about a toy? What do you think about that? And if you have a hard time saying that alone in the context, then the other thing, like with masturbation, you practice on your own. So practice speaking on your own. I am a huge fan of that one alone too. So like, go on a walk by yourself. You want to have this conversation, you want to introduce it, go on a walk and hear yourself say those words. And as you say those words, if you notice belly, you know, like the butterflies in the belly, that's something to pay attention to. And sort of like, oh, why does this feel so? And that's a good way to sort of earn your own confidence in terms of speech.
And that's awesome too, because it gives you a chance to also play around with different wording, to be like, oh, I said this thing and that does not sound like me, did not like that. So like, cool, let me try it this other way.
Right.
They can really figure out like, all right, cool, like this feels like the type of thing that I would say and that I want to talk about, but like this doesn't seem like it is. You know?
Right. And it becomes more embodied speech too, because the more you practice it, the easier it is to say out loud. Like it's a difference between saying, I think I might want a nipple clamp, and to like, oh my God, it would be really, really hot if we like play with pinching nipples. That would be great. And so that is able to sort of like, and it's totally, you know, my heart is open for anyone who's coming from that nervous, vulnerable space. But it's also fun to sort of go on your own when you're practicing your speech about what you would want to introduce, what kinds of things you might want to explore, to be able to sort of say that out loud and sort of embody that in your own flesh. So.
Cool.
It seems like a lot of the tools that we talk about when it comes to consent, sans toys, can I kiss you? Practicing what language works for you is is sort of the key to like beginning these conversations. And I'm sure that the being listening and being open to people's desires is the other side of that coin. And so my follow-up question is a little bit about Sean Potter.
Hi.
Yes. We got so excited.
Oh, one of our previous educators.
Yes. Hello. All the way from Cape Cod, Massachusetts, I think. So my follow-up question was about pressure and coercion in this conversation, because obviously consent doesn't happen when there's pressure or coercion. And so I'm wondering if that's something you see in interactions in the store, or you hear about in conversations about toys, and how do we avoid that?
The reason I'm pausing is because I'm trying, like, my brain immediately goes to examples that I can't discuss for obvious reasons. And so that's sort of the challenge, because I'm going immediately to situations where, and I think like when I have seen, I mean, to a certain extent, because we say we're working with someone, we will try to always encourage, like if somebody, so for example, in here, I will say is not quite as excited to be here as the other person, we will focus our attention on the person who's not quite excited to be here, as far as listening to them and sort of seeing where they're at. And like, as that, and that way for us, it's a way of validating them. And so we're saying, we see you, we hear you, we, you know, and that not necessarily giving the person who's sort of like being much more boisterous about it. But it's hard because it's like, it's not our job to intervene in couples dynamics. So we have to be, it's a very delicate line, especially since we are having access to intimate conversations without any broader context, at all.
I think that feels really interesting to our work also, though, because I think that like sometimes we have conversations about how do you know how far you're supposed to be going in like in a sexual interaction?
Right.
And being like, you go as far as like the person that's least comfortable is able to go, right? And you go at like at that speed.
Right.
So like if we're trying to keep everyone happy and safe, you really have to like listen to the person that is like giving some of that resistance. So.
Right. And I think the key too is like when it comes to like there's not just consent of like, okay, I'm here. I don't consider that consent. I want to see enthusiastic consent.
Yeah.
That would be the key. And so like, and I will say rarely, I think, and this would be a tip if people are wanting to start that conversation. So we already started one with practice your words, but the other one is like when sort of hold up my little resources of stores around is to actually go in with your partner or sort of explore, would you be interested in just going in? We don't have to buy anything, just walk around. Would that be okay? And then that can help also walk in and go, is this all right? Is it not? But it, you know, preferably to be a comfortable space, but you're not pressured to buy anything. You're not, you know, you're not going on a mission, but it's just like, what does it feel like to be here? And it helps sort of make it not necessarily this big, you know, the old school adult stores with blacked out windows and, you know, because there are really positive spaces out there across the country where you will have trained staff who can do what we do as well. So it might be like, oh, I didn't realize it could quite be this way. So that's another start.
That's really huge also because in doing that, it gives someone an opportunity to see what even exists, right? If you're talking with someone, like even someone that's excited, they might not know like all of the things that exist. And so to like walk in and be like, there's no pressure, we're not gonna buy anything, we're just gonna like do a lab.
Yes.
Right? Then that gives you an opportunity to be like, oh, you know that thing that we saw? Like, I'm intrigued. You know?
Right, exactly. And we see that a lot too. And it's like, and it's frequently like, I would rather have somebody come in.
And Caitlin, all of our educators are here.
Hi there!
Hi, Caitlin! From the big city.
I would, and we see that a lot. And actually, it's also part of the training. It's like frequently people do come in and sort of do a quick round and then go and discuss. And then we might even see them like 2 weeks later, a week later, maybe the same night. You know, and then that's another way to sort of facilitate that conversation without there being a commitment. And again, having it not be, again, in those intimate, I think that's, I don't know what you all run across. I think for what we run across, where the trouble lies is when people try to have these conversations in intimate contexts without having had beforehand. That's where you get in trouble.
Well, we are huge advocates for the pants on conversation.
Exactly.
We're gonna copyright it. We just did a Twitter chat where I used that. We were talking with Astroglide and they were like, "Oh, pants on conversation, that's brilliant."
Yes, right.
Yeah.
Trademark.
I was like, "That's ours."
Exactly. Now.
We're like, take the information, we'll keep the name. But I love that it's a similar principle. What you were talking about in the context of going slow and like letting someone just sort of look around and like touch stuff if they want, is it feels to me like a situation that you could say no in.
Exactly.
And that is something we talk a lot about is building a situation in a relationship where no is also a possibility. And a lot of times it's full steam ahead, like, let's get it now, I'm so excited, I'm so hot. Like it can be really hard to say no. So I love that.
I will say we're at 17 minutes.
Oh my goodness. I'm feeling this was, can I do one quick thing? Because we're talking about going to stores. So here we are in Portland, Maine. We don't even have e-commerce. We're really lame. I'm a horrible capitalist. And so I'm holding this up here, which hopefully people can read. So here are some resources out there. So wonderful blogger, Redhead Bedhead, superhero sex shops. She did this fabulous blog entry. So if you just Google superhero, all one word, sex shops, you will find a link to her write-up where she toured sex stores across the country and sort of picked out who the best were and did a really nice description. There's also the Progressive Pleasure Club, and that is a network of, and we're a member of, a bunch of feminist mission-driven stores across the country. And those might be places too, because if you don't have a store there, you can also check out some of the stores online and maybe use that as a conversation. There's always Good Vibes in Babeland, who've been around forever. And that can be another way to sort of look at products, have a conversation, but again, maybe over coffee on the somewhere outside. Maybe not Starbucks. So
that's amazing. So we're gonna have so many more conversations. Period. So many more conversations after we log off that we will release as a podcast later with Gina. So don't worry, you will get more of Gina. You will get more of this conversation, but we want to make sure that we're keeping it a little brief for the internet. So I want to close with a fun visual question because you brought some treats. So Gina, what is your favorite thing or things that you sell at Nomia?
So we don't believe in favorites because everybody's different, with one exception. The one product that I am completely devoted to and would never not have and sell a lot of is lube.
Yay, lube!
Lubricant! So we actually have a couple here. We're going to do this as quick as we can because time.
No rush.
So lubrication.
Woo!
Everything goes better with lube.
Woo!
You can have many different kinds for different types of activities. Quickly, we sort of always do this little PSA, and this is something we might want to talk about more in depth later. So there's water-based, there's silicone, there's oil-based, which is good only if you are in a fluid bonded relationship. Obviously, if latex barriers are involved, you cannot use oil. And what we call hybrids, which is silicone and water. Silicone is a fantastic lube. A dab will do you. It goes forever. It has a consistency of like a thin oil, but it will stain absolutely everything in sight. And it is not the most toy friendly. So we focus on medical grade silicone toys. And so those two do not go together. Hybrids obviously give you a bit of the best of both worlds with water. They last a bit longer and are still toy safe. And then water-based, if there's one, it's where I train my staff, where I think it takes the longest for training, is on lube itself, because there's so many different ingredients, issues for skin sensitivities that some people may have. If people are prone to yeast infections or UTIs or bacterial vaginosis, certain ingredients you want to stay away from. Glycerin is the most common culprit, and it's a longer conversation, but if you are prone to yeast infections, UTIs, or what have you, you want to stay away from any kind of lubrication that has glycerin in it. Glycerin can help facilitate infections for people who are prone. I will get in trouble for this probably, but the people who make KY lubes and they are a little bit glycerin are also the same people who make monostat. Might want to think about that.
Fascinating.
We're going to have a longer conversation about this during our lube episode.
It's me popping mad. But if you want to learn more about lube, and this is another one, I love this article. So just Google ASEC. That stands for the American Association of Sexuality Educators, Counselors, and Therapists. ASEC and lubricants, and you will be directed to a fantastic article that will introduce you to the world of lube.
I'm so excited. We love resources. We love lube. We love lube. We're so excited. We're going to do a whole episode on lube in the future.
Yeah,
so maybe we'll have you
I was gonna say,
back.
lube is a thing.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Gina. Thank you, Hot Goslings, for joining us.
You.
We're going to continue this conversation with Gina, so please keep your eyes peeled for our podcast episode with Gina in it. And if you have any questions for Gina and you tuned in later, whatever, throw them up on the comment section and we'll try to get them answered. Yeah. And if you have any really pressing questions and you are located in Portland, Maine, stop on by. Come see Gina and her staff at Nomia. So thank you, Hot Goslings.
Good night.
Thank you.
Bye.
This is always
Catherine never knows how to shut it off.